Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. Karoshi is a word that's traveled all over the world like sushi, a Japanese word that represents death by overwork. We touched on this just last week. I don't think we gave it a really full hearing, and I'd like to revisit this issue. Dr. Nancy Snow, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Tim.
You're apparently not being killed by overwork.
No, I'm not, and yet I sit here in Japan, and I've been fascinated by the value, which is working hard.
Mm-hmm.
And Karoshi is something, of course, more extreme. But when I asked my Japanese instructor several years ago to give me the highest value, Japanese value, he said isogashi. I've said this before, and I've written about this. Keeping busy. So some people view being at work, these long hours, as also being engaged, being valued in a company or institution. What do you do, though, when clearly things are not going well, you're not getting sleep, you're in this sort of endless cycle? Who do you turn to? Are companies really set up to accommodate a person's need to have some time off? And the government is pushing that with these holidays, but the holidays are a little odd in that some of them come in the middle of the week. They just strike me as a bit bizarre. You should have
Forced
the
holidays,
3-day weekend.
But it's also the fact that the Karoshi issue is also coming up because the people who are dying are, at least in the lawsuits that are being talked about in the news, they're younger and younger people, and a significant number of them are suicides.
Right.
And this expansion of the concept of dying of overwork, it's not 55-year-olds keeling over from heart attacks.
Sure.
The expansion of this term and the way that the labor advisory boards and also the local level on the national level have gone along with this. That, I mean, you may talk about Japan branding and being busy and how that there is a culture of work, but there's been pushback from the government saying, this is wrong. That people are dying of work is in nobody's interest. So they're giving awards for families, the survivors, the surviving families, to say, this was wrong. And since we last talked about Karoshi, they did the government busted into Dentsu and picked up a whole bunch of evidence looking at its employment policies, which is amazing because if you think of Dentsu's power as the major PR company, the world's largest advertising company, that they're in image manufacturing, and yet
they lost that one, didn't they?
They lost it to the government.
But they're well known as a sweat factory, too. I mean, people know that if your child graduates from a #1 university and is lucky enough to be hired by Dentsu, that they're going to be working their tails off for years and years.
And that the thing is the government doesn't accept that anymore. And that's important, I think.
And it's not just Dentsu. Isn't it a lot of these top companies? So wouldn't it have to take a top company?
Sure.
Like a Mitsubishi is also a major employer. That's one where a lot of young people want to work. And they should say, we're going to set a new standard here. And really, I think, too, it does go back to culture and the work culture, and that there is such pressure to be physically in place, even if you aren't doing efficient work. You just have to be there, I guess, because maybe something will come up. It's sort of like crisis mode. But in the United States, 20-some years ago, even when I worked for the government, you could be away from the office as long as you had your deliverables. Or when I worked at UCLA, my boss, when he hired me, said, I don't care if you go to the beach with your laptop. I need this report on a certain day, but where you do it is up to you. So lack of supervision, but you have to be self-directed. And here in this hierarchical society, it's so much of sort of having people kind of check each other's work out and having that top to bottom supervisory atmosphere. And that adds to the pressure. I'm not sure with this new generation, really, if they're ready for that. And that's why that leads into maybe the wish to not spend the rest of your life at the company. I talk to a lot of young people, and they don't have any plans to do this cradle to grave. They don't think the company has the plan, and they certainly don't have the plan because they don't want to be dying on the job or
Right.
just feeling so much pressure on the job.
But once you get on the gravy train, it's kind of hard to jump off.
But in this case, the case that really came out this week was
The Filipino.
Yes. First of all, it's a foreign individual. It's the second time that a person participating in the government-sponsored program for technical training has died. And the death was ruled in favor of the surviving family, saying, yes, this was a death by overwork. The thing is about the trainees, is they're not on a career track. They don't have to do these things unless they're ordered to. The problem is that these small companies that take advantage of the technical training program, which brings in cheap foreign labor and pays them basically slave wages and then sends them away after 3 years. That program is small companies take advantage of it, and they have the government has come down like a hammer on them. The number of citations for violating the rules in terms of paying them properly, in terms of letting them sleep, it's exploded. 2 years ago it was about 700 violations. Last year was 3,900. They are really cracking down, and that's something that you may talk about culture, you may talk about the fact that we have a conservative government. Nevertheless, the Abe administration has come down really, really hard on the abuses, both in the major corporate sector and in this trainee program, in a way that's really impressive, I think.
Well,
okay, so they get a citation, and then what, though? Is it just seen as a cost of doing business, or is this going to percolate into a real image problem for Japan? Because that push toward bringing in these temporary foreign workers will continue. And Japan may be a place where you want to avoid if you're hearing about people coming here and not being able to really make it in the small companies.
Or being worked to death.
Yes.
Right. But the thing that really burns me up is that the people who are damaged, the families of the person who has died, have to convince the company that, yes, it was because of your abuse of my son or my daughter that made them take their life. And the second thing is that this is only the tip of the iceberg, in my view, that there are so many suicides, even at universities, that are caused by this situation. And most of them are not ruled death by overwork or death because of the social structure that's in the workplace.
Though they're litigants, the families, it should take some time, shouldn't it? I'm not representing a particular company, but who else is going to bring that to the fore? If not for these families. But the burden of proof is really on them, though, isn't it?
Yes,
so,
but what a
you're
daunting
an attorney.
task. What a daunting task.
But the thing is that it in the case of the Dentsu suicide, which happened in December of last year, when you compare it to the glacial pace of normal lawsuits in Japan, that can take years and years, there is, I'm going to keep saying, there is a proactive atmosphere that has suddenly emerged in Japan. So that this branding issue, journalists love to talk about death by overwork because it fits in with their ideological vision of what Japan is like. It's not so. Things are on the move. There is change. And we have to say that with these rulings, these recent rulings, having to do with the Dentsu case, the Filipino worker case, things are changing, and they're changing for the better.
Right.
Well, and does it relate back to family planning and getting people to want to be more open to marriage and starting a family? Do you think that's the motivation in part? You want people to have some time off to do other activities, right?
The thing that strikes me about this is that we're doing this to ourselves. It's the people inside the company. It's not because of company regulations. They have regulations on how long you're supposed to work. You punch in, you punch out. But it's the managers that are doing it to their subordinates. And it's their subordinates doing it to the lower levels too. It's just a part of how I'm going to be successful, how I'm going to climb the corporate ladder. I put in lots of time. I show everybody how much I'm sweating from the brow, doing it for you guys.
But it's not just corporate. I have to interject and say it's not just the corporate image. It's not this warrior samurai businessman thing. It has to do with part-timers as well. The trick that the restaurants have been pulling of making people managers so that
they don't qualify.
For overtime.
Right.
That vicious tactic of suddenly putting on them hundreds of extra hours of unpaid overtime because they're managerial class.
Right.
That kind of really abusive behavior is finally being shown, and they talk about black companies, about companies you cannot work for, and there are lists, don't work for these people. That is coming out, and it's a good thing.
Right.
It's a great thing, I think.
One of the issues we were trying to meld into this topic was productivity and increasing productivity. And one of the observations that most foreigners make when they come to Japan to work inside a company is that people really work long, but I don't know if they're really very productive.
Right. Oh, I guess not.
Be a little bit more productive here.
Yeah, but I mean, Michael, you sort of act like we're not in support of all of this coming to light. Of course we are, and we should see more of that. And I would give credit to the Abe administration for this. What I'm trying to understand is why now? And that's why I'm trying to link it to other social issues. Is it because they want people to step back from the workplace and go out and date and couple and get married and, yes, have children?
I don't know about that.
Well,
I think that's too far forward
Well, then
thinking.
what is their motivation?
No, the motivation is one that it looks bad. And
It does look bad.
Well, then it is a branding issue.
It is a branding issue, and it does look bad. And certainly, you also have to possibly guess that there is actually social change going on, and that these issues that were previously under the rug are now coming out. It is, of course, also having to do with feminization. I agree. That if you're going to have women in the workforce, and in the case of the Dentsu suicide, it was a young woman, a high-ranking Tokyo University graduate, who took her own life just because she couldn't get herself out of this basically hamster wheel that she had gotten herself on, and simply lost all sense of proportion.
And it's not like nobody was watching.
And so nobody was watching. She was living in the company dormitory, so that they had a supervisory role, at least in some way. And certainly she was in constant contact with many levels of her company, not just her boss in some isolated office. No, she was living in an environment. That environment is not acceptable, is the social change that is happening. And yes, it has to do with women entering the workforce.
Right.
And not only that, it's like I've said before, it's these young women who are going abroad and seeing a different reality. It is women who have been historically maybe more dispensable in the workplace. They're finding out that you can have a life and a work balance in other places. And so when they return to Japan, if that is not possible at a Japanese company, for these professional women, a lot of them whom I meet, they're going to look elsewhere. They'll either join the international company or they'll leave. And I think the government has great concern about that. They want these women to stay.
And that's the same case in case of the Filipino worker. It's about, we need you.
Yes.
And the way we're going to show that is when you are abused, we will be your tribunes. We will be your advocates.
So what are the whistleblower laws here in Japan? What are they like? Because that comes up a lot in the U.S., but we are notorious for our litigious society. So how does it compare? Do you get punished if you're the whistleblower, or you have the kind of what we call the giraffe syndrome, where you're kind of sticking out your neck on the job and saying, we won't tolerate this anymore? Is there a way to protect those people so that you can have more come forward? Why was that woman feeling so all alone on Christmas Day that she would take her life?
I think one of the scariest things that a Japanese can feel is being ostracized from their group or from their social network. And I think most people, even if they feel a burning need and a conviction to say something, they don't, because they just don't want to be potentially ostracized from the group. And you're the whistleblower, you need to go out. And then what happens to their network and their livelihood?
Well, it's interesting in this case that it's the government, though, in a sense, that's being the whistleblower. I mean, that's a little bit ironic.
With the Filipino who died, it was the government who said, you should file a claim. You should pursue this because it looks like your son was killed by overwork.
In this case, it was the wife and child, the surviving family back in the Philippines. And yes, there was encouragement. You know, this thing happened to you, and you deserve.
It's a great thing to say.
Yeah.
Social issues under change, you rarely see it, but when you do, it really is important. It projects lots of things that you can follow throughout society. Please stay tuned. Social change in Japan, it's happening now.